Sometimes the most dangerous assumptions we make are about people who look different from us. In a world where appearances deceive and prejudice blinds, one young woman's quiet confidence would shatter everything her tormentors thought they knew about power, control, and respect. What happens when the hunters become the hunted, and the victim reveals herself to be the master? This is the story of Sarah Chun, a girl whose gentle exterior hid years of specialized training, and how a group of bullies learned that sometimes the most unassuming person in the room holds all the cards. Sarah Chun adjusted her backpack straps as she walked through the gates of Riverside High School. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard where groups of students clustered together like territorial animals. At 17, Sarah had already attended 4 different schools due to her father's military career, but something about this place felt different. Maybe it was the way conversations stopped when she passed, or how eyes followed her with barely concealed suspicion. Her slight frame and quiet demeanor made her an easy target. She stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulder-length black hair that she kept simply styled and dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. Sarah wore a plain gray hoodie and jeans, nothing that would draw attention, yet somehow she still managed to stand out in all the wrong ways. The first week passed without major incident. Sarah kept to herself, sitting alone at lunch, and walking quickly between classes. She had learned long ago that being invisible was often the safest strategy in new environments. But invisibility, she was about to discover, was not always possible. It was Marcus Thompson who first noticed her. Standing 6 feet tall, with the kind of athletic build that came from years of football and weightlifting, Marcus commanded respect through intimidation. His close-cropped hair and permanent scowl had earned him a reputation as someone you did not cross. He ruled his corner of the school with an iron fist, surrounded by a loyal group of followers who hung on his every word. "You see the new girl?" Marcus asked his friends during lunch, nodding toward Sarah as she sat alone reading a book. "Thinks she's too good to talk to anyone." Jake Martinez, Marcus's closest friend and fellow football player, followed his gaze. "She's probably one of those weird smart kids. Always got their nose in a book, thinking they're better than everyone else. Maybe we should help her feel more welcome," Marcus said with a cruel smile. "Show her how things work around here." Sarah was well aware of their attention. Years of moving from place to place had taught her to read social dynamics quickly. She could feel their eyes on her, could sense the shift in energy that preceded trouble. But she also knew that running would only make things worse. Predators always chased when their prey fled. The confrontation came on a Friday afternoon. Sarah was walking toward the parking lot where her father was supposed to pick her up when Marcus and his group intercepted her path. They formed a loose circle around her, casual enough to avoid drawing attention from the few teachers still on campus, but tight enough to make their intentions clear. "Hey, new girl," Marcus called out. "We haven't properly introduced ourselves. I'm Marcus. These are my friends." He gestured to the 4 other boys surrounding her. "We run things around here, and we like to make sure everyone understands their place." Sarah stopped walking and looked up at him calmly. "I understand perfectly," she said in a quiet voice. "Is there something specific you wanted?" Marcus was taken aback by her composure. Most students would be nervous by now, stammering or try to walk away. But Sarah stood perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "Yeah, actually there's something I want," Marcus said, his voice growing harder. "I want you to show some respect. When you walk through our school, you acknowledge the people who matter. You don't just drift around like some ghost, ignoring everyone." "I'll keep that in mind," Sarah replied evenly. Jake stepped closer, trying to intimidate her with his size. "She's got an attitude problem, Marcus. Maybe she needs to learn some manners." Sarah's eyes flicked to Jake briefly, then back to Marcus. In that moment, she assessed each of them, their postures, their positioning, their body language. Marcus was the leader, confident in his authority, but relying heavily on his size advantage. Jake was the enforcer, aggressive but sloppy. The other three were followers, dangerous in a group, but unlikely to act independently. Learning manners is important, Sarah agreed. Perhaps we all have something to learn. Her calm response infuriated Marcus. He was used to fear, to stuttering apologies, and desperate attempts to appease him. Sarah's composure felt like defiance, and defiance could not be tolerated. You think you're smart, don't you? Marcus stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. Let me explain something to you, new girl. This school has rules, and I enforce them. You can learn to follow them the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying him with the kind of attention she might give to an interesting insect. What exactly are these rules? Rule number 1, respect your betters. Rule number 2, know your place. Rule number 3, when someone like me is talking to you, you listen. Marcus was warming to his theme now, enjoying the audience his friends provided. Seems like you need a practical demonstration. That was when Sarah noticed the dog. It was tied to a post near the school's maintenance building, about 50 yards away. Even from a distance, she could see it was a German shepherd, large and powerful looking. The animal was agitated, pacing back and forth as far as its chain would allow, occasionally letting out sharp barks that echoed across the empty parking lot. You see that dog over there? Marcus followed her gaze and smiled. That's Rex. He belongs to old Mr. Peterson, the groundskeeper. Peterson thinks having a guard dog makes the school safer, but between you and me, that animal is half wild. Peterson can barely control him, and anyone else who gets too close. He shrugged. Let's just say Rex doesn't like strangers. Sarah continued to watch the dog with interest. Rex was indeed agitated, but not in the way Marcus described. The animal's body language spoke of frustration and poor treatment, not natural aggression. His coat was dull, his ribs slightly visible, suggesting inadequate care. This was not a well-trained guard dog. This was a neglected animal whose instincts had been corrupted by human failure. Funny thing about Rex, Jake added with a nasty grin. He hasn't been fed in 2 days. Peterson's been training him, trying to make him more aggressive. Hungry dogs are mean dogs, or so the theory goes. Sarah's expression did not change, but something cold settled in her eyes. Animal neglect was something she had zero tolerance for, regardless of the justification. You're going to help us with an experiment, Marcus continued. See, we've always wondered what would happen if someone accidentally got locked in that storage cage next to Rex. Just for a few minutes, of course. Just long enough to see how a hungry, angry dog reacts to a stranger in his territory. The storage cage Marcus referenced was a chain-link enclosure used to store groundskeeping equipment. It was positioned directly adjacent to where Rex was chained, close enough that anyone inside the cage would be within the dog's reach. Sarah looked from the dog to the cage to Marcus. That would be animal cruelty and false imprisonment. Both are serious crimes. Marcus laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Only if someone reports it. And who's going to believe the weird new girl over 5 upstanding student athletes? Besides, accidents happen all the time. Especially to people who don't know their place, Jake added. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between each of the boys surrounding her. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft they had to strain to hear her. You're making a mistake. The only mistake, Marcus said, grabbing her arm, would be thinking you have a choice in this matter. They marched her across the parking lot toward the maintenance building. Sarah did not resist, did not cry out for help. She walked calmly between them, her eyes fixed on Rex. The dog had stopped pacing and was now watching their approach with intense interest. His ears were forward, his tail motionless, every muscle in his body alert. As they drew closer, Sarah could see more details that confirmed her assessment. Rex's water bowl was empty and dirty. His food bowl was nowhere to be seen. The area around his post was littered with his own waste, indicating that no one had cleaned his living space in days. This was not training. This was neglect bordering on abuse. Here's how this works, Marcus explained as Jake fumbled with the lock on the storage cage. We put you inside, leave you alone with Rex for about 10 minutes, then come back to let you out. considered orientation for new students. What if the dog attacks her? One of the followers asked nervously. Then, she learns a valuable lesson about respecting people who are trying to help her. Marcus replied coldly. Sarah stepped into the cage without resistance. The enclosure was roughly 8 feet by 10 feet, filled with lawn mowers, rakes, and other maintenance equipment. The chain link walls rose about 7 feet high, topped with 3 strands of barbed wire. Rex's chain was long enough that he could reach the cage walls, and as Sarah settled into position, the dog approached slowly. "This is your last chance to apologize," Marcus said through the fence. "Admit you were wrong to disrespect us, promise to follow our rules, and we might let you out early." Sarah looked at him through the chain link. "I think you're the ones who are about to learn something new." Marcus secured the lock with a metallic click. 10 minutes, he called out. "Let's see how tough you are then." As the 5 boys walked away, already laughing about their clever prank, Sarah turned her full attention to Rex. The German Shepherd was now pressed against the cage wall, his massive head level with her chest. His eyes, she noted, were intelligent despite the poor treatment he had received. This was still a good dog underneath the neglect and mistreatment. Sarah slowly reached in her hoodie pocket and pulled out the turkey sandwich she had saved from lunch. Rex's nose twitched at the scent, and his tail gave a tentative wag. Instead of the aggressive snarl Marcus had expected, the dog was showing cautious hope. "Hello, beautiful boy," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying a tone that Marcus and his friends had never heard from her. It was warm, confident, and filled with an authority that seemed to resonate with Rex immediately. "You're hungry, aren't you? And tired of being treated badly?" She unwrapped the sandwich and held it up where Rex could see it. The dog's entire body language changed. His ears perked up, his tail began wagging more enthusiastically, and he let out a soft whine of anticipation. "Seat, sa commendit gently." Rex immediately sat, his eyes fixed on the food. "Good boy. Stay." Sarah moved closer to the fence, close enough that Rex could have easily reached through and grabbed her if he had wanted to. Instead, the dog remained perfectly still, waiting for her command. What Marcus and his friends did not know, what no one at Riverside High School knew, was that Sarah Chun was not just any military brat. Her father was Colonel James Chun, head of the K9 training program at Fort Bragg. Sarah had grown up surrounded by military working dogs. She had learned to read canine behavior before she could ride a bicycle. By age 10, she was helping to train police and military dogs. By 15, she was considered one of the most gifted young handlers her father had ever seen. Rex, despite his poor treatment, recognized something in Sarah that no human had shown him in months: genuine respect and understanding. When she held out a piece of turkey, he took it gently from her fingers, his massive teeth carefully avoiding contact with her skin. "You're not aggressive at all, are you?" Sarah murmured, continuing to feed him small pieces. "You're just scared and hungry and tired of people who don't understand what you need." From across the parking lot, Marcus and his friends watched in amazement as the supposedly vicious guard dog seemed to calm down in Sarah's presence. They were too far away to hear her words or see the food, but they could see that Rex was no longer pacing or barking. "Maybe the dog's just tired," Jake suggested uncertainly. "Or maybe he's getting ready to attack," Marcus replied, though he sounded less confident than before. Inside the cage, Sarah was making remarkable progress with Rex. After finishing the sandwich, she had managed to get her hand through the chain link to scratch behind his ears. The dog leaned in her touch with obvious pleasure, his eyes closing with contentment. "You know what you need?" Sarah asked him. "You need someone who understands that you're not a weapon or a tool. You're a partner. You need someone who will treat you with the respect you deserve." Rex's tail was wagging steadily now, and he had pressed his entire body against the fence to be as close to Sarah as possible. When she moved to a different part of the cage, he followed along the outside, staying as near to her as his chain would allow. Sarah began to notice other things about Rex's situation. His collar was too tight, causing the fur around his neck to mat and thin. His nails were overgrown, indicating he had not been getting enough exercise on proper surfaces. His water bowl was not just empty, but cracked, meaning it could not hold water properly even when filled. The more she observed, the angrier Sarah became. This was not just neglect. This was systematic abuse disguised as training. Someone was deliberately keeping Rex hungry, thirsty, and frustrated in the mistaken belief that it would make him a better guard dog. In reality, it was destroying his natural temperament and turning an intelligent, loyal animal into a neurotic, unpredictable liability. As the 10 minutes stretched on, Sarah made a decision. She was not just going to survive this encounter. She was going to use it to expose everything that was wrong with how Rex was being treated. But first, she needed to establish a deeper connection with the dog. "Rex," she called softly. The dog's ears immediately perked up at the sound of his name, spoken with kindness. "Do you want to learn something new? Something that will help you feel better about yourself?" What happened next would have amazed any professional dog trainer. Despite having no treats left and no formal training equipment, Sarah began working with Rex using only her voice, her body language, and her deep understanding of canine psychology. She taught him to heel along the fence line, to sit and stay at varying distances, and to respond to subtle hand signals. Rex responded with enthusiasm that bordered on joy. Here, finally, was a human who spoke his language, who understood what he was capable of, who treated him like the intelligent partner he was meant to be rather than the dangerous animal others feared him to be. By the time Marcus and his friends returned, expecting to find a traumatized girl and an agitated dog, they instead discovered something that challenged everything they thought they knew about power, control, and respect. Sarah was sitting calmly in the center of the cage, and Rex was lying down outside the fence in a perfect sphinx position, his alert eyes tracking her every movement with obvious adoration. "What the hell?" Marcus stared at the scene in disbelief. Sarah looked up at him with the same calm expression she had worn throughout their earlier confrontation. "Hello again. Are you ready to let me out? Or should Rex and I continue our training session?" The 5 boys exchanged confused glances. This was not how their carefully planned humiliation was supposed to unfold. The new girl was supposed to be crying, begging, maybe even injured. She was supposed to have learned her lesson about challenging their authority. Instead, she seemed completely relaxed, and the supposedly vicious guard dog was behaving like an obedient pet. "How'd you do that?" Jake asked despite himself. "Do what?" Sarah replied innocently. "Make the dog act like that. Rex is supposed to be mean. He's supposed to attack strangers." Sarah looked at Rex, who immediately sat up straighter at her attention. "Rex isn't mean. He's been mistreated and neglected, which has made him defensive and unpredictable. But he's not aggressive by nature. He's actually quite gentle, aren't you, boy?" At the sound of her voice, Rex's tail began wagging, and he let out a soft whine of acknowledgement. Marcus felt his carefully constructed world beginning to tilt. Nothing about this situation made sense. The new girl was supposed to be helpless, supposed to recognize his superiority and beg for mercy. Instead, she seemed to have accomplished something that no one else at the school had managed. She had gained Rex's trust and cooperation. "You're lying," Marcus said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "That dog is dangerous. Everyone knows it. Everyone assumes it," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference between knowledge and assumption." Rex has been responding to poor treatment with defensive behavior, which people have misinterpreted as natural aggression. But look at him now. She gestured toward the dog, who was still sitting calmly outside the cage, his eyes fixed on her with obvious affection. "How?" one of the other boys asked. "How did you know how to do that?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. She had spent years learning to downplay her abilities, to blend in and avoid drawing attention. But this situation called for a different approach. These boys had tried to use an innocent animal as a weapon against her, and in doing so, they had revealed the depth of their ignorance and cruelty. "My father is in the military," she said simply. "I've grown up around working dogs. I know how to read their behavior and how to communicate with them effectively. It was a massive understatement, but it was also the truth. What she did not say was that her father commanded one of the most elite K10 programs in the country, that she had been personally trained by some of the best dog handlers in the world, that she could work with animals that most professional trainers would not dare approach. Marcus's face was red with embarrassment and anger. His brilliant plan had not only failed, it had made him look foolish. "So what?" he blustered. "You got lucky with one stupid dog. That doesn't change anything." Sarah stood up slowly, her movements causing Rex to rise as well, his attention focused entirely on her. "Actually, it changes everything." There was something in her tone, a quiet confidence that made all 5 boys suddenly uncomfortable. Sarah Chun, the quiet new girl they had dismissed as an easy target, was looking at them with the same assessing gaze she had used earlier, but now they could see it for what it really was, the look of someone who had sized them up and found them wanting. "You tried to use an abused animal as a weapon against another person," Sarah continued, her voice still soft but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character, your judgment, and your fitness to lead anyone or anything." Marcus fumbled with the lock, his hands suddenly clumsy with rage and confusion. "Shut up. Just shut up and get out of there." Sarah waited patiently as he opened the cage, then walked out with the same calm dignity she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. Rex whined softly as she moved away from the fence, clearly reluctant to see her go. "This isn't over," Marcus warned, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then at each of his friends. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that they had to lean in to hear her, but every word was crystal clear. "Yes, it is." She turned and walked away without another word, leaving the 5 boys standing beside the cage with an increasingly agitated Rex, who was now pulling against his chain and barking loudly, clearly upset at her departure. As Sarah walked across the parking lot toward the school entrance, she pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her father. "Dad, need to talk to you about a dog situation at school. Can you pick me up early?" The response came back immediately. "On my way." "Everything okay?" Sarah looked back at Rex, who was still barking and straining toward where she had disappeared, then at Marcus and his friends, who were giving the now agitated dog a wide berth. "Everything's about to be," she typed back. What Marcus and his friends did not realize as they hurried away from the maintenance building was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their academic careers. They had not just bullied the wrong girl. They had revealed themselves to be the kind of people who would abuse innocent animals for their own entertainment. And Sarah Chun, with her quiet manner and unremarkable appearance, was about to show them that sometimes the most unassuming person in the room holds all the cards. The real story was just beginning. Colonel James Chun arrived at Riverside High School 20 minutes after receiving Sarah's text. He drove a simple black pickup truck and wore civilian clothes, but there was something unmistakably military about his bearing as he walked across the parking lot. At 45, he was still in excellent physical condition, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed very little. Sarah was waiting for him near the main entrance, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her expression thoughtful. When she saw him approaching, she walked out to meet him, and Colonel Chun immediately knew that something significant had happened. He had raised his daughter to be resilient and adaptable, qualities essential for military families who moved frequently. But he also knew her well enough to recognize when she was deeply troubled. "What happened?" he asked without preamble as they got into his truck. Sarah buckled her seatbelt and was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "There's a German shepherd on the school grounds. He's being neglected and possibly abused by the groundskeeper. Some students tried to use him to intimidate me, but the dog isn't naturally aggressive. He's just been mistreated." Colonel Chun started the engine, but did not immediately drive away. "Are you hurt?" "No, but the dog needs help, and the students who did this need to face consequences for what they try to do." As they drove home, Sarah provided her father with a detailed account of the day's events. She described Marcus and his friends, their attempt to lock her in the cage with Rex, and what she had observed about the dog's condition. Colonel Chen listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly grim. "You're certain about the dog's condition?" he asked when she finished. "Completely. Overgrown nails, visible ribs, dirty, and empty water bowl, tight collar, signs of chronic stress. Someone has been deliberately keeping him hungry and frustrated, probably thinking it would make him a better guard dog." Colonel Chun pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. Their house was a modest ranch-style home on base housing, identical to dozens of others except for the large, well-maintained dog run in the backyard where Colonel Chun sometimes brought work home with him. "What those students did was assault," he said seriously. "Using an animal as a weapon, even unsuccessfully, is a serious crime. But before we involve the authorities, I want to see this dog for myself." They spent the evening discussing strategy. Colonel Chun made several phone calls, speaking in the careful, professional tone that Sarah recognized from his work conversations. By bedtime, a plan was in place. The next morning was Saturday, which meant the school grounds would be largely empty except for maintenance staff and possibly some weekend sports activities. Colonel Chun and Sarah arrived at Riverside High School at 8 o'clock, joined by two other individuals whose presence would prove crucial to what happened next. The first was Captain Maria Santos, a military veterinarian attached to Colonel Chen's K10 program. She was a small woman with dark hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, and hands that moved with the confident efficiency of someone who had treated hundreds of military working dogs. She carried a black medical bag and wore an expression of professional skepticism. The second was Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, one of the most experienced dog handlers in Colonel Chen's unit. Rodriguez was a big man with gentle eyes and a soft voice, qualities that made him particularly effective with traumatized or difficult animals. He had volunteered to come along after Colonel Chun explained the situation. "Where's the dog?" Captain Santos asked as they walked across the parking lot. Sarah led them toward the maintenance building, where Rex could be seen pacing within the limits of his chain. As they approached, the German Shepherd's behavior was exactly as Sarah had described, agitated and defensive, but not inherently aggressive. His ears were forward, his tail held stiffly, and his entire body radiated the kind of tension that came from chronic stress and poor treatment. "Jesus," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez muttered under his breath. "Look at him." Captain Santos was already pulling on latex gloves. "Sarah, can you approach him safely?" Sarah walked slowly toward Rex, her body language relaxed and non-threatening. The dog recognized her immediately, his tail beginning to wag as she drew closer. Within moments, she had her hand through the chain-link fence, scratching behind his ears while he pressed against the barrier to get as close to her as possible. "Remarkable," Captain Santos said, watching the interaction with professional interest. "He's completely different with her than he was when we first arrived." Colonel Chun was examining the area around Rex's post with growing anger. The dog's living conditions were even worse than Sarah had described. The ground was littered with waste that had clearly not been cleaned up in days. The water bowl was not only empty, but cracked so severely it could not hold liquid. There was no food bowl in sight, and the dog's collar was indeed too tight, causing the fur around his neck to mat and thin. "This is criminal neglect," he said flatly. "Maria, I need you to document everything." Captain Santos began taking photographs while Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached Rex from the opposite side. Despite his initial wariness of the stranger, Rex allowed Rodriguez to examine him through the fence, clearly influenced by Sarah's calming presence. "He's underweight," Rodriguez reported, "probably 15 to 20 pounds below what he should be. Coat's dull, nails are overgrown, and look at those pressure sores on his legs from lying on concrete." They were interrupted by the arrival of an elderly man in dirty coveralls who emerged from the maintenance building with obvious irritation. "Hey, what are you people doing here? This is school property, and you're not supposed to be messing with my dog." Colonel Chun turned to face the man, and his bearing immediately shifted into something that Sarah recognized as his command presence. "Are you Mr. Peterson?" "Yeah, that's me. And You need to get away from Rex before he bites someone. That dog is dangerous. Dangerous? Captain Santos looked up from her photography. This animal is severely malnourished and showing signs of chronic abuse. When was the last time you fed him? Peterson's face flushed red. I feed him plenty. I'm training him to be a better guard dog. Sometimes that means starving an animal and neglecting basic care. Colonel Chin's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the calm tone. Mr. Peterson, I'm Colonel James Chun, and these are my colleagues from the military K9 program. We're here to investigate reports of animal abuse. Peterson's bluster immediately deflated. Look, I don't know what someone told you, but I know how to handle dogs. I've been working with them for years. Then, you should know that what you're doing is not training, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said, his own voice hardening. This is systematic abuse. A properly trained guard dog is confident, well-fed, and responsive to commands. What you've got here is a neurotic, stressed animal who's been pushed to the edge of his psychological limits. Peterson looked around at the three military personnel and Sarah, clearly realizing that he was in serious trouble. Who complained? Was it some of the students? Because they don't know what they're talking about. The complaint came from someone who knows exactly what they're talking about, Colonel Chin replied. Sarah, would you demonstrate proper handling technique? What happened next was a masterclass in professional dog handling. Sarah entered Rex's enclosure through a gate that Peterson reluctantly unlocked, and within minutes, she had the German Shepherd responding to voice commands, hand signals, and positioning cues with precision that would have impressed trainers with decades of experience. Rex sat, stayed, healed, and even performed a basic protection sequence, all without a single raised voice or harsh correction from Sarah. His tail wagged throughout the demonstration, and his entire demeanor radiated the kind of confidence and joy that came from working with a handler who truly understood him. This is what proper training looks like, Sarah said quietly as Rex executed a perfect recall and sat at her feet. Partnership, not domination. Respect, not fear. Peterson watched in stunned silence as the supposedly vicious guard dog he could barely control responded to a 17-year-old girl like a perfectly trained partner. How did he began? Military K9 families, Colonel Chun said simply. Sarah has been around working dogs her entire life. She's been formally trained by some of the best handlers in the country. Captain Santos finished her examination and stood up, stripping off her gloves with sharp, angry movements. This animal needs immediate medical attention. He's dehydrated, underweight, and suffering from multiple skin conditions caused by poor hygiene and inadequate nutrition. I'm recommending immediate removal from this environment. You can't just take my dog, Peterson protested. He belongs to the school district. Actually, we can, Colonel Chin replied, pulling out his phone. I've already spoken with the school superintendent and the local sheriff's department. Animal control is on their way, along with representatives from the district attorney's office. You're going to be facing charges of animal cruelty, and the school district is going to be answering some very difficult questions about their oversight of this situation. As if summoned by his words, several vehicles began pulling into the parking lot. A white animal control van, 2 sheriff's department cruisers, and a sedan that belonged to the school district's legal counsel. Peterson looked around desperately. Look, maybe I made some mistakes, but I was just trying to do my job. The school wanted a guard dog, and I was giving them what they asked for. The school asked for a guard dog, Sarah said, still standing beside Rex with one hand resting on his head. They didn't ask for animal abuse disguised as training. The next several hours were a whirlwind of official statements, evidence gathering, and legal procedures. Rex was officially seized by animal control and would be housed temporarily at a local veterinary facility while his case was processed. Peterson was arrested on charges of animal cruelty and released on his own recognizance, but his employment with the school district was immediately terminated. But the most significant development came when the school district's legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Morrison, pulled Colonel Chin aside for a private conversation. Colonel, I need to ask you about yesterday's incident involving your daughter and some students. Colonel Chun had been expecting this. What would you like to know? We've received reports that 5 students may have attempted to lock your daughter in an enclosure with this dog as some kind of prank or intimidation tactic. If that's true, we're looking at potential charges of assault, false imprisonment, and reckless endangerment. Sarah joined the conversation, having overheard the exchange. It's true. Marcus Thompson and 4 other students forced me into the storage cage next to Rex's enclosure. They intended for the dog to attack me. Morrison made notes on a legal pad. Are you willing to provide a formal statement and press charges? Sarah looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, what they did was criminal, and it put both me and Rex at risk. If I hadn't known how to handle the situation, someone could have been seriously hurt. We'll need to interview the other students involved, Morrison said. Can you provide their names? As Sarah recited the names of Marcus and his friends, Morrison's expression grew increasingly grim. These are all student athletes, members of the football team. This is going to create a significant scandal for the school. Good, Colonel Chin said flatly. Maybe it will encourage better supervision and accountability. By Sunday evening, the story had exploded across Riverside High School social networks and parent communication channels. The arrest of the groundskeeper for animal abuse was shocking enough, but the revelation that 5 popular student athletes had attempted to use the abused dog as a weapon against a new student created a firestorm of outrage and controversy. Monday morning brought a transformed school environment. Sarah arrived to find herself the center of intense attention, but not the kind she had experienced the previous week. Students approached her with curiosity and respect, wanted to hear firsthand about her encounter with Rex and her role in exposing the abuse. Marcus and his 4 friends were notably absent, having been suspended pending a full investigation and potential criminal charges. The football team, already struggling with a losing season, was devastated by the loss of 5 key players and the negative publicity surrounding their actions. Principal Williams called Sarah into his office during second period, accompanied by the school's guidance counselor and a district representative. Miss Chun, Principal Williams began, I want to personally apologize for what happened to you on Friday. The school district takes full responsibility for the unsafe conditions that allowed this incident to occur. Sarah sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, listening with the same calm attention she had shown throughout the entire crisis. We're implementing immediate changes to prevent anything like this from happening again, the district representative added. New policies for animal management on school grounds, enhanced supervision of student activities, and mandatory training for all staff on recognizing and reporting animal abuse. Those are good steps, Sarah acknowledged. But what about the students who were involved? What they did wasn't just a prank that got out of hand. They deliberately tried to use an abused animal as a weapon against another student. Principal Williams shifted uncomfortably. The matter is being handled through both our internal disciplinary procedures and the criminal justice system. The district attorney's office is reviewing the case for potential charges. Sarah nodded. She had expected nothing less, but she wanted to hear it confirmed officially. There's something else, the guidance counselor interjected. We understand that your family moves frequently due to your father's military service. If you're concerned about completing the school year here after everything that's happened, we can work with you on transfer options. Sarah considered the offer. In the past, she might have taken it, choosing the easier path of starting over somewhere new rather than dealing with the aftermath of conflict. But something had changed during her encounter with Rex and her confrontation with Marcus. She had discovered that she was tired of running, tired of making herself invisible to avoid trouble. Thank you for the offer, she said finally, but I think I'll stay. Riverside High School is obviously a place that needs people who are willing to stand up for what's right. The adults in the room exchanged glances, recognizing the quiet strength in her voice. In that case, Principal Williams said, is there anything we can do to help make the rest of your time here more positive? Sarah thought about Rex, now recovering at the veterinary facility under the expert care of Captain Santos. She thought about the other students who had approached her with questions about dog training and animal welfare. She thought about the opportunity to use her unique skills and knowledge to make a real difference. Actually, yes, she said. I'd like to start an animal welfare club, something focused on education about proper animal care and training. There are a lot of misconceptions about working dogs and animal behavior, and I think students would benefit from learning the truth. The request was approved immediately, and by the end of the week, Sarah found herself with a dozen interested students and the enthusiastic support of the school's biology department. But the most satisfying development came the following Saturday, when Captain Santos called to inform her that Rex had made a full recovery and was ready for placement in a new home. The military K9 program had evaluated him and determined that despite his traumatic experience, he retained the intelligence and temperament that would make him an excellent working dog with the right handler. Actually, Captain Santos said, "Your father and I have been discussing a proposal. Rex has bonded so strongly with you that we think he'd be perfect as a demonstration dog for your new animal welfare club. Would you be interested in becoming his official handler?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Captain Santos thought the connection had been lost. "Sarah, are you there?" "I'm here," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you saying Rex could come home with us?" "If your father approves and you're willing to take on the responsibility, yes. He'd still technically be part of the military program, available for demonstrations and educational events, but his primary assignment would be as your partner." Colonel Chun, who had been listening to the conversation, gave his daughter a smile that conveyed years of pride and affection. "I think that's an excellent idea." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of her first animal welfare club meeting with Rex sitting calmly at her side, wearing a new collar that fit properly and boar tags identifying him as a certified therapy and demonstration dog. The dozen students in attendance watched with fascination as she explained the basics of canine behavior and training principles. "The most important thing to understand," Sarah said, running her hand along Rex's head as he gazed up at her with obvious adoration, "is that every animal deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. They're not weapons or tools to be used against other people. They're partners, and when you treat them as partners, amazing things become possible." Marcus and his friends, who had eventually been charged with assault and reckless endangerment, had received probation and community service. Part of their sentence required them to attend Sarah's presentations about animal welfare, a requirement that Marcus privately resented but publicly accepted as better than jail time. Watching Sarah work with Rex, seeing the trust and communication between them, Marcus began to understand something he had missed entirely during their first encounter. Sarah Chun was not the helpless victim he had assumed her to be. She was someone who possessed knowledge, skills, and inner strength that he had never developed himself. For the first time in his life, Marcus Thompson found himself genuinely admiring someone he had initially tried to dominate. Sarah noticed his attention, but did not acknowledge it directly. She had learned that true respect could not be demanded or forced. It had to be earned through consistent demonstration of competence and character. The scared, defensive new girl who had arrived at Riverside High School was still there, but she was no longer hiding behind a mask of invisibility. Rex, sensing her confidence, pressed closer to her side and let out a soft, contented sigh. He had found his true handler at last, and she had found her voice. The real lesson was just beginning to unfold. 3 months after the incident that would forever change Riverside High School, Sarah Chin stood before an assembly of 500 students with Rex at her side, preparing to deliver a presentation that had been requested by schools throughout the district. The girl who had once made herself invisible to avoid conflict was now the most respected student on campus, sought out for her expertise and admired for her quiet strength. Rex had transformed alongside his handler. Gone was the stressed, defensive animal who had paced frantically at the end of his chain. In his place stood a magnificent German shepherd with a glossy coat, bright eyes, and the confident bearing of a dog who knew his worth. He wore a special harness identifying him as a certified therapy and demonstration dog, and his presence had become a source of pride for the entire school community. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice carrying easily through the gymnasium sound system. "3 months ago, most of you didn't know I existed. Those who did know about me probably thought I was just another quiet military kid who would keep her head down and disappear by graduation. Today, I want to talk to you about the difference between being invisible and being overlooked and why that distinction matters more than you might think." In the audience, Marcus Thompson sat with his former friends, all of whom were still serving their community service sentences. The past 3 months had been a humbling experience for the group that had once ruled their corner of the school through intimidation. Their arrest had made regional news. Their athletic careers had been permanently derailed, and they had been forced to confront the reality of their actions in a series of court-mandated counseling sessions. Marcus had initially approached these sessions with resentment and anger, convinced that he was the victim of an overblown reaction to what he considered a harmless prank. But as the weeks passed and he attended Sarah's animal welfare presentations, something began to shift in his understanding of what had actually happened that day. "Rex, and I want to demonstrate something for you," Sarah continued, signaling the dog to move into position. "Rex, hail." The German shepherd immediately moved to Sarah's left side, matching her pace perfectly as she walked across the stage. His attention was focused entirely on her, and his tail wagged with the obvious joy of a dog who loved his work. "Stay," Sarah commanded, walking several feet away from Rex. The dog remained motionless, his eyes tracking her movement, but his body completely still. "Come." Rex trotted to her side and sat automatically, looking up at her face with obvious adoration. "This looks simple, but it represents something profound," Sarah explained. "Trust, communication, and mutual respect. Rex responds to me not because he fears me, but because he trusts me. He knows that I will never ask him to do anything that would harm him or anyone else. I will never use him as a weapon or a tool to intimidate others." Several students in the audience shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the indirect reference to the incident that had brought Sarah and Rex together. "Now, let me show you what happens when that trust is established," Sarah said. "Rex, guard." The transformation was immediate and startling. Rex's entire demeanor changed as he moved into a protective stance beside Sarah, his ears forward and his gaze scanning the audience with alert intensity. He looked every inch the formidable guard dog, capable of defending his handler against any threat. But when Sarah placed her hand on his head and said softly, "Easy, boy, friend," Rex immediately relaxed, his tail resuming its gentle wagging as he returned to his previous calm state. "The difference," Sarah explained, "between a well-trained protection dog and an abused animal used as a weapon is control, purpose, and relationship. Rex will protect me if necessary, but he will never attack without cause, and he will stop immediately when I tell him to. This is what real strength looks like. Power combined with discipline and restraint." In the audience, Marcus found himself thinking about his own relationship with power and control. For years, he had believed that strength meant the ability to intimidate others, to force compliance through fear and aggression. Watching Sarah work with Rex, he began to understand that true strength came from competence, confidence, and the ability to influence others through respect rather than fear. After the assembly, Sarah was surrounded by students asking questions and requesting demonstrations. She handled each inquiry with patience and expertise, using every question as a teaching opportunity. Rex, meanwhile, seemed to enjoy the attention, allowing students to pet him while maintaining his calm, dignified composure. It was during this informal session that Marcus finally approached her. He had been trying to work up the courage for weeks, knowing that he owed her an apology, but struggling to find the right words. "Sarah," he said quietly, waiting for a break in the crowd of questions. She turned to face him, and Marcus was struck by how much she had changed since their first encounter. The quiet, seemingly fragile girl who had arrived at Riverside High School had evolved into someone who radiated confidence and authority. She was still small in stature, still spoke softly, but there was something about her presence now that commanded respect. "Marcus," she replied neutrally, neither encouraging nor dismissive. "I wanted to talk to you," he said, glancing around at the other students who were still lingering nearby. "Privately, if that's okay." Sarah considered the request, then nodded toward a quiet corner of the gymnasium. Rex followed automatically, positioning himself where he could observe both Sarah and Marcus without seeming threatening. "What did you want to say?" Sarah asked when they were out of earshot of the other students. Marcus had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times in his head, but now that the moment had arrived, all of his carefully planned words seemed inadequate. "I'm sorry," he began. "Not just because I got in trouble, not just because it was the wrong thing to do, but because I understand now what I almost cost both of us." Sarah waited for him to continue, her expression neutral but attentive. "I thought you were weak," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as he found his footing. "I thought being quiet meant being helpless, and I thought I could use that to make myself feel more powerful. I was wrong about everything." "What changed your mind?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Marcus looked at Rex, who was lying calmly at Sarah's feet, but watching the conversation with alert interest. "Watching you work with him, seeing what real strength actually looks like. You accomplished more with that dog in 10 minutes than Peterson managed in months, and you did it without raising your voice or using force. You made me realize that I've been confusing aggression with strength my whole life." Sarah nodded slowly. This was the kind of insight she had hoped to encourage through her presentations and her work with the Animal Welfare Club. "I've been going to counseling," Marcus continued. "Court-ordered at first, but I kept going after my sentence was up. I'm trying to understand why I thought intimidating people was acceptable, why I needed to feel powerful at other people's expense." "And what have you learned?" Sarah asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "That I was afraid," he said finally. "Afraid of not being important, afraid of not matching, afraid of being ordinary. Bullying other people made me feel significant, but it was a fake kind of significance built on hurting others." Sarah felt a surprising surge of respect for Marcus. It took genuine courage to examine your own behavior so honestly, especially when what you discovered was unflattering. "What are you going to do with that knowledge?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "I can't undo what I did, and I can't take back the way I treated people. But I could try to do better going forward. Maybe find ways to feel significant that don't require hurting others." Sarah looked at him thoughtfully, seeing not the arrogant bully who had tried to intimidate her months earlier, but a young man who was genuinely trying to change and grow. "Have you considered joining the Animal Welfare Club?" she asked. Marcus looked startled. "Would you want me there?" "The club isn't about me," Sarah replied. "It's about education and making a positive difference. If you're serious about changing, it might be a good place to start. We're always looking for people who want to learn." Marcus felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. "I'd like that. If you think I could contribute something positive." "Everyone can contribute something positive if they're willing to do the work," Sarah said. "But it would mean acknowledging publicly that you were wrong about animal training, about what strength really means, and about how people should treat each other." "I can do that," Marcus said without hesitation. "I want to do that." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Principal Williams and Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the district's new director of student services, a position created in response to the reforms implemented after the Rex incident. "Sarah, we have some exciting news to share with you," Principal Williams said, his face bright with enthusiasm. "Dr. Hayes has been working on a proposal that we think you'll find very interesting." Dr. Hayes, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an efficient manner, stepped forward. "Sarah, your work here has been so successful that we'd like to expand it district-wide. We're proposing to create a formal program that would bring animal-assisted therapy and education to schools throughout the region. Sarah felt her pulse quicken with excitement, but she kept her expression calm. What would that involve? You and Rex would travel to different schools, providing presentations like the one you gave today, helping to establish animal welfare clubs, and working with students who have experienced trauma or behavioral challenges, Dr. Hayes explained. We've received requests from 12 schools already, and the state education department is interested in funding a pilot program. It would mean missing some regular classes, Principal Williams added, but you'd receive independent study credit and the experience would look incredible on college applications. We're also talking about the possibility of college scholarships specifically for students who demonstrate excellence in animal-assisted therapy work. Sarah looked down at Rex, who seemed to sense the importance of the conversation, and was sitting at perfect attention, his intelligent eyes moving between the adults as they spoke. I'd be interested, she said carefully, but I want to make sure that Rex and I were actually helping students, not just putting on demonstrations for entertainment. Absolutely, Dr. Hayes assured her. This would be a genuine therapeutic and educational program with proper oversight and assessment of outcomes. You'd be working with trained counselors and therapists, and every placement would have specific goals and measures of success. Marcus, who had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement, suddenly understood something profound about Sarah Chun. She was not just a talented dog handler or an effective advocate for animal welfare. She had discovered a way to use her unique skills and experiences to make a real difference in the world, to transform her own trauma into a tool for helping others. Sarah, he said impulsively, would there be a place in that program for someone like me? Someone who's made mistakes, but wants to do better? Dr. Hayes and Principal Williams looked at him with surprise, clearly not expecting the question from a student who had been suspended and charged with assault just months earlier. Sarah, however, considered the question seriously. What would you want to contribute? I don't know exactly, Marcus admitted, but I've learned things about what it's like to be on the wrong side of power, about what happens when you make choices based on fear and insecurity. Maybe that experience could be useful to other students who are struggling with similar issues. Dr. Hayes looked intrigued. You're talking about peer counseling, essentially. Students who have worked through their own behavioral problems, helping others who are facing similar challenges. Maybe, Marcus said. I just know that if someone like me had talked to someone like me 3 months ago, maybe I would have made different choices. Sarah found herself impressed by Marcus's insight. The idea of incorporating reformed bullies into anti-bullying programs was not new, but it was often effective when done properly. If you're serious about this, she said, you need to complete additional counseling, probably volunteer with community organizations working on conflict resolution, and demonstrate consistent positive behavior over time. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen quickly. Understand, Marcus replied, but I'd like to try. Dr. Hayes made notes on her tablet. This is an interesting development. Let me look into the feasibility of incorporating peer counseling components into the program. Marcus, would you be willing to speak with our district counselor about your experiences and your interest in this kind of work? Yes, absolutely. As the group continued to discuss the possibilities, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. She had not only overcome the challenges that had faced her as the new student at Riverside High School, she had transformed those challenges into opportunities to help others. Rex, as if sensing her emotional state, leaned against her leg in a gesture of support and partnership. Sarah scratched behind his ears, remembering the terrified, neglected animal he had been just months earlier. His transformation paralleled her own in many ways. Both had found their true strength when they stopped being victims and started being partners. Over the following months, the animal-assisted therapy program exceeded everyone's expectations. Sarah and Rex visited schools throughout the region, working with students who had experienced trauma, helping to resolve conflicts between classmates, and educating thousands of young people about animal welfare and responsible pet ownership. Marcus, true to his word, completed additional counseling and began volunteering with a local conflict resolution center. His combination of personal experience with bullying behavior and genuine commitment to change made him an unexpectedly effective peer counselor. He eventually became a regular participant in Sarah's school visits, sharing his story as an example of how people could change and grow. The most rewarding moment came during a visit to a middle school where Sarah was working with a group of students who had been involved in bullying incidents. One of the students, a 13-year-old boy named David, reminded Sarah strongly of Marcus during their first encounter. Angry, defensive, and convinced that intimidating others was the only way to feel powerful. "This is stupid," David announced during Sarah's presentation. "Dogs are just animals. They don't care about respect or whatever. They just do what you make them do." Sarah exchanged a knowing look with Marcus, who was helping with the session. They had encountered this attitude many times before. "Would you like to test that theory?" Sarah asked calmly. "Rex, come here." The German Shepherd approached and sat beside Sarah, his attention focused on her face. "David, I'd like you to try commanding Rex to sit." David looked skeptical, but stepped forward. "Sit," he said in a harsh, demanding voice. Rex looked at him briefly, then turned his attention back to Sarah, completely ignoring the command. "See," David said triumphantly. "He didn't do it." "Now watch," Sarah said. She looked at Rex and said softly, "Sit, please." Rex immediately sat, his tail wagging. "Try again," Sarah suggested to David. "But this time ask him nicely, like you would ask a friend to help you with something." David looked embarrassed, but tried again, this time moderating his tone. "Rex, would you please sit?" Rex looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly, then sat for David, though his body language remained somewhat wary. "The difference," Marcus explained, stepping forward to join the demonstration, "is that Rex responds to respect and kindness, just like people do. When you try to force someone to do something through aggression or intimidation, they might comply out of fear, but they won't trust you or want to help you." Sarah watched as understanding dawned in David's eyes. It was the same moment of recognition she had seen in Marcus months earlier, the realization that true influence came through building relationships rather than demanding submission. "I used to think like you do," Marcus continued, his voice gentle but honest. "I thought being tough meant being mean, and I thought making people afraid of me made me important. But all it really did was make me lonely and angry all the time." David looked up at Marcus with new interest. "What changed your mind?" Marcus gestured towards Sarah and Rex. "They did. Not by punishing me or fighting back, but by showing me what real strength looks like. Sarah could have gotten me in even more trouble than I already was, but instead she gave me a chance to learn and do better." "Why?" David asked. Sarah smiled at the question. "Because everyone deserves a chance to grow and change as long as they're willing to do the work. Rex was an angry, scared dog when I first met him, but look at him now." David looked at Rex, who was sitting calmly between Sarah and Marcus, his intelligent eyes alert and his entire demeanor radiating confidence and contentment. "Do you think I could learn to work with dogs like that?" David asked hesitantly. "If you're willing to learn patience, kindness, and self-control," Sarah replied. "Those are the most important skills for working with animals. And they're pretty important for working with people too." 6 months later, David had become one of the most dedicated members of his school's newly formed animal welfare club. His transformation from classroom bully to animal advocate had been so complete that he was being considered for the peer counseling program that Marcus had helped to develop. Standing in her father's backyard on a warm spring evening, watching Rex play with a group of military working dogs that Colonel Chun had brought home for socialization training, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that first day at Riverside High School. She had learned that being quiet did not mean being weak, that true strength came from competence and character rather than aggression and intimidation. She had discovered that her unique background and skills could be used to make a genuine difference in the lives of others. Most importantly, She had learned that sometimes the best response to cruelty and ignorance was not retaliation, but education and the patient work of helping others become better than they were. Colonel Chun joined her on the back porch, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea and wearing the proud expression that Sarah had come to treasure. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Just thinking about how different things are now," Sarah replied, accepting the glass gratefully. "A year ago, I was just trying to get through high school without causing any problems. Now I'm helping to shape district policy and working with students across 3 states. Are you happy with how things turned out?" Sarah considered the question as she watched Rex demonstrate a perfect recall to a young military handler who was still learning the basics of dog training. The German Shepherd's joy in his work was evident in every movement, and Sarah felt a corresponding warmth in her own chest. "I'm proud of what we've accomplished," she said finally. "Rex and I have found our purpose, and we're using it to help others find theirs. That feels like the best possible outcome." Colonel Chin nodded with satisfaction. He had raised his daughter to be resilient and adaptable, but watching her grow into someone who could transform challenges into opportunities for service and leadership filled him with a pride that went beyond paternal affection. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. Sarah's mother had died in a car accident when Sarah was 12, a loss that had shaped much of her subsequent development, and her father's determination to provide her with the skills and confidence she would need to navigate the world alone. "I think she'd like Rex," Sarah said, smiling as the dog bounded over to check on her before returning to his training session. She always said that the best relationships were partnerships where both parties made each other better. As the sun set behind the trees that bordered the base housing area, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with personal achievement and everything to do with purpose fulfilled. She had learned to use her voice not to demand attention, but to educate and inspire. She had discovered that true power came not from dominating others, but from empowering them to become their best selves. Rex trotted over and settled at her feet, his work for the day complete and his contentment matching her own. Together, they had overcome abuse, ignorance, and cruelty through patience, competence, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. The girl who had once made herself invisible to avoid conflict had become a beacon of hope for students across the region. The dog who had been twisted by neglect into a dangerous liability had become a symbol of redemption and the power of proper care and training. Their story had become a testament to the truth that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of courage. A quiet girl refusing to be intimidated, a neglected dog trusting a gentle hand, and 2 unlikely allies discovering that together they were stronger than either could be alone. In schools throughout the region, students who had never heard of Sarah Chan or Rex were learning lessons about respect, partnership, and the difference between real strength and mere aggression. The impact of their work would ripple outward for years to come, touching lives and changing minds in ways that neither Sarah nor Rex would ever fully know. But sitting on her father's porch on that warm spring evening, with Rex breathing peacefully at her feet and the sounds of successful training sessions filling the air, Sarah Chin knew that she had found her calling. She was no longer the new girl trying to remain invisible. She was a teacher, a healer, and a bridge between worlds that too often remained isolated from each other. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning.